Thank you, everyone, and welcome again to the OPIM X Crypto Debate, INSTO FOMO. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Robby Young from Animoca Brands, who runs the shop over there and is also actually a director of the Sandbox platform, which has been a runaway success this year. Robby, welcome aboard.
Hi, how are you? It's good to see you. Thanks for having me today.
Great, absolutely. Look, I'm going to jump into it. Robby, we just had an incredible second half of the year in crypto. We did have a flash crash over the last few days, but overall, the sentiment is still really, really bullish on the sector. And a big part of that is because of gaming, which has been a huge topic, especially after some of the big players like Facebook, Google, Microsoft announced their intentions of moving into the space. So I want to take a step back here. And for our audience today, we are coming from the perspective of private equity investors, allocators, and I want to talk to you a little bit about Animoca's sort of vision and your perspective on how the landscape has changed for private equity investors, especially now those who have come from traditional finance are moving into crypto and I guess GameFi for the first time. So why don't we start off briefly, what's the vision that Animoca has from this year onward, and what are the trends that you're seeing from investors who are approaching you today?
Sure. I think, the trend is definitely a long-term one, which is why I think we kind of ignore the short-term volatility. I think this is, loosely what we call this entire trend is Web3. So, the first version of the web during the 90s being the original creation of the web, search engines and such, and email especially. And then Web 2 being a lot more focused around social media and the centralization of platforms around Facebook and Google and Apple on mobile, et cetera. And now Web 3 is about blockchain. And Web 3 is about the idea of blockchain being this secure underlying technology that provides an economic underpinning. Because one of the things that, Web 1 was originally the dream. It was a decentralized global communication network. We could all exchange our information. But what it lacked great security. There was no way to do transactions in a secure way because it wasn't designed for that. It was designed for communicating, not for exchanging value. And so that's where blockchain comes in, because blockchain allows us to essentially create trustless transactions. So you and I can exchange, cryptocurrencies or any kinds of tokens without having to actually trust. I could assume that you're a scammer and we can still have a transaction that functions because of the security protocols involved. And that's a magical thing. It means that all of a sudden you don't need to, it solves the old, what I always call the eBay problem. How do you know what you're buying is legitimate, or that somebody's not going to assault you in a parking lot when you exchange goods with them. Blockchain solves that because you basically just have a custodial system out in the cloud there that essentially allows you to transact digital assets from one to another securely. And so the idea is, what happens when you're able to actually do that? What happens to the underpinnings of everything that we know about the internet? And the answer is that all changes, because all of a sudden you don't have to have all those workarounds. So, thinking of it through the lens of entertainment, over the last 10 years, we've had a massive coalescence around streaming platforms. Everybody goes to Spotify and YouTube and Netflix for their entertainment content. And the reason is because we don't have a great digital rights management system in place on Web 1 or 2. And so as a result, streaming has become the only way to really manage copyright effectively on a mass basis. Now that we have blockchain, that will change, because then we can go back to the original dream of downloading individual tracks, managing rights, having the tracks be able to share royalties directly with artists automatically. And so when we think about the implications of this, it's massive. So the area that we focus on in gaming is specifically on this idea of owning your own digital content. So in gaming for the last 20 years, the main model in gaming has been the so-called free-to-play model, where the games are free to play, but you download content in the games, You spend additional money in the games to enhance your experience. And this process has been largely we kind of a feudal process, because the game players, although they believe that they're buying things in the games, they're actually just spending money in a rental economy, because they don't really own what's in the game. You can't sell your items, you can't take them out of the game, you can't trade them with your friends. They exist in this walled garden of the game and never to be released. And in the worst case, when you're a big fan of a game and you play for years, often you'll find that the developer will stop supporting the game at some point in time, and you're kind of left out in the cold. And it's understandable. Developers don't necessarily want to work on the same product for their entire careers, so they move on to the next thing. But that leaves the fans behind. And so what happens with blockchain is that it allows us to actually enable that true digital asset ownership for the customers. So we tokenize the in-game content as non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, and we tokenize the in-game currency as a fungible token, like, as you may know, an ERC20 token, like an Ethereum compatible token. And by doing this, it means that everything that you play with in the game that you buy, you own. And you can take that outside of the game. You can put it on OpenSea, a very popular NFT marketplace, exchange it with other players, etc. And what's more than that, sorry, go on.
Interrupt there, Robby. This is actually really interesting, because a lot of investors have a hard time grasping that the marketplace of game players, or just individuals, or even just NFT buyers, is really about ownership. And,
yes.
and that is one dimension of it. I wanted to touch on something that your firm is moving into very, very quickly into, which is not just ownership, but also having it as an asset that can yield and generate income.
Sure.
This aspect of combining, in a way they call DeFi, combining with gaming, therefore GameFi. Walk us through what that means, because this is something that actually has a lot of parallels with asset management in the real world, whether you own fleets of cars or fleets of taxis, fleets of airplanes. The same type of model in terms of asset leasing is actually taking place in the gaming world. So maybe walk us through your articulation of how that works.
Sure. So I think the reason that this happened is because, as we started to develop games on blockchain, the blockchain native audience were mainly people who came from a fintech background, because those have been largely the people interested in crypto over the last decade or so. And so as we make games, the most exciting part about using blockchain as an underpinning technology is that it's essentially open source. So we can all benefit from the work that everybody else in the sector does. And this means that essentially I can take my game that's built on blockchain and I can connect it up to a DeFi protocol that's on the same blockchain, and extend the capability of my game by incorporating that DeFi functionality. And that's quite exciting, because when you think about being able to take entertainment products and just literally plugging them in to a multi-billion-dollar world of finance, what you're essentially doing from the gamer's perspective is you're offering more metagames inside. Right. So in a traditional game, you may have an action game that you're playing, like a football game, but then metagames like the Football Manager game have always been extremely popular. And this allows us to do kind of the same thing. So for example, I'll give you an example. We have a game called Formula One Delta Time, where, as you can guess from the name, you buy and race Formula One cars around a track. You can buy the cars, you can buy the drivers, etc. And what we've done is we've also, aside from the driving game itself, we've layered in metagames, because what we're always trying to do is to think about how we can cater to different audiences. And when we created these highly collectible F1 cars, you can buy Lewis Hamilton's season-winning car, you can buy Verstappen's car, etc. And a lot of people wanted to collect the cars and not necessarily race them all the time. So we thought, well, what can we do for those people who want to collect the cars? Well, actually, we can help them yield farm. So we created this DeFi functionality that allows them to stake their cars to earn a yield on them. And that way, there's an incentive for that sort of crypto-minded player who wants to earn yields from somewhere, and they're thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll buy an F1 car and do it. And I think, to make a great Hong Kong-based analogy, it reminded me of country club debentures. So it's it's kind of a thing that, because I don't know if you remember, about 10 years ago, country club debentures went through the roof, and
Yeah.
people were looking for alternative assets.
Or
And
private investors now, same thing.
exactly. But the key part of it is the utility. So the idea is, I can put my money into this, but most importantly, I get yield in going to the country club.
Yeah.
Same thing is true in our game. You can stake your cars, but at the same time, you can have cars that you own as collectibles, or you can play with them. You can do many different things with them. So the more utility that you have in those cars, the better.
It's interesting you mentioned this sort of relationship between the crypto asset owner and then the player. One thing that I'm hearkening back to, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm actually a big World of Warcraft addict from back long ago when I was in college. And one of the things I'm not unashamed of, but I did do, which was I did pay a gold farmer out
Mm-hmm.
some developing country to farm World of Warcraft gold so that I wouldn't have to do that myself. It cost
Mm-hmm.
me $20 and they gave me 1 million gold, and that allowed me to buy in-game assets, which I don't own, but allowed
Yep.
me to buy in-game assets in order to perpetuate or speed up my development. So in essence, I was paying someone to do this because my time I felt was more valuable doing something else. And this is sort of capitalism in its purest form. But then I take a step forward, a step further, and when I in an AMA that actually heard one of your projects, Star Atlas. Congratulations, by the way, is a runway success.
Thank you.
Michael Wagner talks about how this new form of relationship between asset owners and players actually also can become a new form of income for a lot of people, or whether it be in developing countries and even in developing countries, as a form of earning a living.
Yes.
So how are you seeing this pan out, as especially we're moving into a space where we're post Axi Infinity, which is again another runway success. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see this panning out from a socioeconomic perspective?
Sure. I think, again, the key here is that essentially blockchain levels the playing field in terms of global access to finance, because it's essentially a peer-to-peer transaction, which means that we have a way to bank the unbanked. And this is really exciting. And I think Axie Infinity is a phenomenal example of how this can happen through the economy of a game system. But I think it's a metaphor for the wider economy as well. So when we look at what they've done in Axie Infinity, they have a great game. It's very sticky. People love to play it. And what they discovered was that the in-game functionality, again, this is a model of similar to what we were just talking about, where connecting a game system into the back end of DeFi, of decentralized finance, can enable spectacular things. So here they have a game where they're creating in-game assets, and the activity in the game is what creates those assets. So you got to earn, you've got to breed Axies, and it takes time, and you've got to play, and so there's hours spent. And in a game, we've always tried to balance two things. We've tried to cater to audiences that have lots of time and very little money, and lots of money and very little time. And those are the two kinds of audiences we try to satisfy. And Axie has married these two together, because the people who have time and less money are grinding away, playing in the game hour after hour to earn these in-game assets. And the people who have money then buy those assets, because those assets have value in DeFi for earning them yield. And so it becomes a virtuous circle where those two audiences can actually serve each other. And it got a lot of attention because the audiences who were spending time in the game were actually largely from the Philippines. And so they've done a fantastic job, actually, of employing literally tens of thousands of people in the Philippines who are working in this game as a part-time job, earning income. And the way that this levels the playing field is because they can actually receive the payment directly because of blockchain. They don't have to have a credit card. They don't have to get it sent to a, Western Union or something. Everybody can just have fair access as long as they have an internet connection.
That's a great point, because that's exactly one of the points that El Salvador and other parts of Latin America were raising when foreign workers were remitting capital back to homes, that the amount of fees that they were paying for companies like Western Union were exorbitant, were absolutely crippling in some cases once you aggregated in some. So this is fascinating that this ease of transfer and asset management, or at least cash infrastructure, offers a lot of opportunity. I want to take a step back and look at it from the perspective of private equity investors and VC investors who we're talking to now. If we're looking at the space now, and its innovation is moving so quickly, where DeFi was really new a year ago, or even a year and a half ago, now it's almost obsolete in the sense that you have to look into GameFi, and then from GameFi moving forward. So a couple of questions. One is, how is this new form of GameFi looking to change moving forward as we move into, number one, price discovery of NFTs and the value of NFTs in these assets, and number two, how you strike a balance as a game maker, because a lot of that value is extracted either through the scarcity of the NFT or through the earnability of the in-game asset.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, when we think about making games, of course, there's always the primary ingredient, which is fun. So we try to think about how we make the games fun, because at the end of the day, when you think of what gives any kind of digital asset value, it's utility, which is why I think we've seen this incredible increase in the value of Ethereum relative to Bitcoin over the last several years, because Ethereum is, infinitely programmable, and it's really a software platform on which we can build stuff. And so that gives it tremendous utility. I think Bitcoin has a unique place in our digital asset hearts as the original store of value, so it will maintain that status. But I don't foresee other cryptocurrencies, competing with Bitcoin on that. They will have to have utility in order to be valuable. And so we think about in-game assets the same way. The important thing for us as a game maker is that we're generating as much utility for those assets as possible. So the more places that players can use them, et cetera, the more likely they are to have long-term value. So let me give you an example, which is, the Formula One Delta Time game I talked about for car racing uses an in-game currency called the Rev token, which we created. And we thought, this Rev token is really, it has so much more potential than just being an in-game currency for this game. We can actually think of this as almost a loyalty program for people who are car enthusiasts. And so what can we do with this that would be more exciting for them? Well, we then launched a MotoGP game. We launched a Formula E game. We launched our own Rev Racing game. And across all these games, you can use the same in-game currency, because the premise is, if you like cars, you'll probably like all these other automotive related or motorsports related games. And on top of that, we then talk to other partners who make other motorsports related products, Crypto Motors or Hudson Racing, et cetera. And you can now spend your Rev on their products as well. So what we've tried to do with Rev is give it as much functionality as possible across a wide range of motorsports related stuff, because that way it will appeal to motorsports fans. When they play the games, they earn Rev, and now they can spend their Rev not just on one game, but on, 4 games in various e-commerce stores and elsewhere. So that, we think, is fundamental to the underlying value of the Rev token, because it has more and more utility, and the more games and things we can add to it, the more valuable it will become.
So when I look at this from the perspective of a PE investor, I'm looking at it from two different types of return profiles, because on one hand, there's the individual tokens and the ecosystems of specific games, and then there's the ecosystem of cross-platform or cross-game platform tokens, such as what you have with Rev. I think Gala has something similar as well. As they have the Gala token, which can be used in multiple different coins. Sen can be used in multiple different subparts of its ecosystem. So as an investor coming into the space right now, is the idea is what's the savvy thing to do? Should I be looking at specific games that are building a token from scratch and only limited to that game, or should I be looking at platform tokens? And because it's a very big difference, one might have a great acceleration, and the other one might be a slower burn over a longer period. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think again, I'm going to go back to the fundamental utility, argument. So I think that if for anybody new to the space, I mean, I always recommend that they take a toe in the water approach. As we always say, this is not investment advice, but I would suggest starting with things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, just to get an understanding of how the technology works. But then when you get more sophisticated, I would think the way to think about fungible tokens, so in-game currencies, is very much to think about audience. Because if you think about why, physical currencies in the world, the US dollar, the euro, et cetera, are valuable, very often it's based on what you can do with it. The fact that you can travel around Latin America or parts of Africa and spend US dollars means that US dollars have a lot of utility relative to, Swiss francs, which may be not accepted in different parts of Latin America. And so it's really that utility argument that provides the intrinsic value in the asset. And so I would look around at the ecosystem of things that you can do with that token. It may be that there's a token, so for example, the in-game currency, the AXS token that's in Axi Infinity, is only usable in Axi Infinity. But Axie Infinity has a massive user base, right, across many, many countries around the world. So it's a reasonable bet that that token has a lot of utility because it has a massive audience, even though you can only use it in one product. Whereas, and so I would always tend to look at user base as a proxy for utility.
It's massive. The market cap, the fully diluted market cap of Axie is something like $35 billion.
Yes.
Which is tremendous. And when I first started looking into this space, I had a hard time wrapping my head around how to value these currencies by market cap, and to sort of bridge that understanding with my traditional sense of price to earnings or price to book, for example. It's very similar in a way, but it's more to do with the utility of the token rather as a form of valuation rather than anything else. And so when you talk about setting up new games, or from the perspective of an investor, I guess, for you, Animoca, building new games or even investing into new projects, because it looks like you're now not just developing in-house games, but you're now investing in third-party games and development teams as well. So for us coming in as an allocator, one things that we look at when we look at any VC, it's really about pedigree, about team background, about know-how, about track record. But this industry has a very short track record. Gaming does have a long track record, but cryptocurrency or NFT has a it's still very, very new. So when you look at a team, how are you assessing that team before you make an allocation and before you take that?
Sure. I mean, I think we tend to look at their experience, working on various blockchain-related projects. I think an important thing is to really try to get a sense of whether they understand the implications of the technology, because I think we're at a period now which actually reminds me a lot of the late '90s in the first web go round, because I think there's a combination of a lot of people who are, and hopefully I count ourselves amongst them, players who really feel like this is an evolutionary change in technology, and we're kind of, digging ourselves in for a 10 or 15-year cycle here. And then there are a lot of people who come in and say, hey, look, there's a lot of money over there. Let's go and move into that business. And they're just, they're just trying to come in to ride the wave for as long as they can, but maybe they come from, a non-technology background or from some other industry. So I think there's both of those in the market right now. You've seen a lot of price escalation or perceived price escalation. I mean, this year is the the year of the $50 million Series A round, you know. So I think you need to do your homework.
I was gonna rename OPIM to OPIM Metaverse Fund Management, and
Exactly.
go out and raise a few bucks. That's, you know, I'm not too greedy.
Exactly.
You know, and that, you know, and that's the problem, that not problem, but one thing I notice in that is I'm inundated with when I look at new projects is every Tom, Dick, and Harry now has an angle on this.
Mhm.
So for retail investors, or at least, you know, individual investors who are not as experienced, it's actually very dangerous. It's exciting because
Yes.
it's coming in on the ground up. But a lot of these teams are pre-alpha, and safe. And to be honest, even Star Atlas was pre-alpha. It still is kind of
Mhm.
pre-alpha in a way, as
Mhm.
successful it is in its capital raising. But it's a Hail Mary. And so how do you help your allocators wrap their head around how much time it takes actually to get some of these games to market? Because even
Sure.
Sandbox is a 4-year development,
Mhm. Yep,
right?
4 years of development built on top of an original game that's run for a decade.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And the technology itself, from a gaming perspective, isn't entirely new. A lot of it has been around for a very long time, and the
Yes.
target audience is very similar in a way to like the Minecraft audience in a way, because it's made for creators as much as it is for users. But the question then I have is, you know, from the perspective of investors, on one hand, I see these token appreciations going up very, very quickly. Is it you know, how long should I be budgeting to have my allocation into a fund like yours, or into a VC?
Mhm. I mean, my view is everybody should be taking a long-term view because we are at a cyclical change in technology. So I firmly believe that we're kind of in a, you know, 1994 moment of the web, or, you know, a 2009 version of mobile. This is just the beginning, and I think we've one of the things about entertainment coming to blockchain is entertainment is going to onboard the mass market to blockchain, whereas blockchain has been more of a niche fintech focused product for a long time. Blockchain is amazing. And the thing is, we in, you know, the entertainment business are actually free riding on top of 10 years of development investment that the financial community has put into blockchain. So we're benefiting from all of that field testing and stuff. You know, it's robust. It works really well. We didn't invent it overnight, but we're just inventing some fun applications and new ways to use it that we think will bring on new audiences. So I think if I were an investor, I would say, you know, look at this market and think where you want to be in 5 years or 10 years, and be prepared to sit there and completely ignore short-term volatility, because this is about a fundamental change in the way that we connect and communicate. Because the internet until now has been all about downloading video, audio, and text. And it's been essentially a one-way medium, not that different from television, frankly, which is why I think we've seen, you know, Facebook and Google and Apple have essentially become like television networks. Now, once we have the ability to do peer-to-peer secure financial transactions, you know, that changes everything. That changes the world of banking. That changes the world of government. That changes, you know, entertainment is a very, you know, lighthearted topic, and yet it does onboard mass market consumers. But once they have a wallet because they enjoy playing a game, then why don't you pay their salary in their wallet? Why don't you, you know, do property title deed transactions to their wallet? Once everybody has a blockchain wallet, that will change everything. It's just like when everybody finally gets a broadband connection, your life changes as a result of that. So I think that's why we largely ignore short-term volatility. To be honest, myself, I don't even really look at crypto market prices, because as soon as you start looking at it, it's like staring into the sun. You'll just not be able to look away, and you lose a lot of sleep and everything like that. Because this is a long-term trend, and I think once you come to understand that and believe in that, then you're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, yeah. Then you can relax a little bit more.
Exactly.
You mentioned about getting a wallet in everyone's hand, and we also talked a little bit about security earlier. I've been a victim of scam sites myself. I got accidentally clicked on a smart contract that gave the hacker rights to basically trade assets out of my wallet into bad coins.
Mhm.
And I still pride myself as someone who's relatively tech savvy, and I still
Mhm.
got caught. Where do you think the technology needs to be for mass adoption to help avoid something like this? Because we're talking about, different types of economic background where,
Yes.
if I get cleaned up $10,000, $20,000, it's affordable. I can handle it. It's not going to kill me. But if that happens to someone in the Philippines, there's no way to get that back.
Sure. Sure. And security is always going to be an issue. And I think the one thing that's different is, of course, the ability to interconnect everybody has positives and negatives, which, it means that you can find employers and employees everywhere, but you can also find criminals. I think, like everything else, one of the good things about criminals is they tend to look for the most lucrative targets. So if you're not the most lucrative target, then often you might be okay. But for the more high profile targets, then obviously security becomes more of an issue. I think it's, as you said, it's about treading lightly and just ensuring that all of your steps are taken with secure sites and original content. And so you do have to do your homework in that case. And there are definitely scams out there. We've come across, just yesterday, we came across one where they were buying, they're running a phishing scam and buying Google AdWords. So when you search for our game, the first ad that pops up in the search results above is the scam.
Oh my goodness, that
Yep.
would be me. Honestly, if I had a few too many beers, I'd come home and I just that would be me, right? I would
Yep.
click one of those
Exactly.
and connect my wallet, sign some contract that I don't know, and that's it. You're cleaned up.
Yes. And I think that's one of the reasons also that, as we always mention, one good security protocol is to have hot and cold storage. So cold storage being offline, and your hot wallet that's connected to the internet, just have what you're prepared to lose and transact on at the time when you need it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Absolutely. And for members of our audience today, do keep a cold storage. Don't think that you're a unique snowflake. All of us are victims, and all of us are targets. One last question. Congratulations. We just saw the news yesterday that you are actually collaborating with Binance on their
Yes,
$1 billion fund, and I believe it's a $200 million fund. Is that right? That you're
correct.
putting together? Yeah, tell us more about the mandate, where you guys are looking
Sure,
to deploy the
sure.
capital. Yeah.
Sure. Well, it's not a fund per se, but it is an investment initiative because, as you know, we make a lot of strategic investments. And so we decided to make a co-investment initiative with Binance, essentially to focus on incubating projects that are geared towards the Binance Smart Chain platform and the Binance ecosystem. So we make a lot of investments into game companies and emerging entertainment companies in this sector. And Binance Smart Chain is one of the key players in terms of infrastructure. So we wanted to collaborate with them to particularly focus on I guess having a formalized way to incubate those companies in the Binance ecosystem.
Awesome. Well, congratulations again. And
Thank you.
hope to see more amazing games come out. Look, I'm going to let you go, but just one more question. Are you a big NFT owner yourself? You have a couple of.
I have a few, although they tend to be a little bit biased towards our own products, and also honestly because I'm a bit of a petrol head, so I have a lot of cars
Oh,
and NFT cars.
so this is for the. I'm sorry. The name of the game is.
F1 Delta Time, and then we have also Rev Racing.
Wow, that's two of them: F1 Delta Time and Rev Racing. All right. Well, look, maybe I'll hit you up for some tips or some NFTs we can give away to our friends or something. But
Absolutely.
congratulations again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for joining us. This has been a fascinating discussion with Mr. Robby Young from Animoca Brands. Thank you again, Robby, and we'll talk to you
No
soon.
problem. Thanks for having me.